Hello, I'm Paul Gates. Welcome to this week's episode of The Academics. Joining me today are our regular panelists, Professor Heather Page Preston, Dr. Dave Spiceland, and our special guest, Dr. Valerie Wieskamp. Valerie, you're one of 3 professors on campus who have just been awarded a $100,000 grant. Tell us about the other faculty who will be working with you, your co-investigators, and what the grant is about.
So the grant is from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It's part of their Dialogues on the Experience of War program. And my co-project directors are Dr. Clark Maddox, who's the director of the Watauga Residential College, and he is a veteran of the Army. He served during the Cold War. And Dr. Lynn Searfoss, who is the director of who's in the English department, and her son is a veteran of the military. He served in the Navy and the hospital corpsman. So,
yeah. Actually, I used to live next door to them, and her son went into the Navy the year they moved to Boone to start at Appalachia.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, tell us about the project. What are you investigating?
Yeah. So what we've done is we have set up a discussion series. So there'll be one that's in the fall, and then one that's also in the spring. And this involves reading books, films, and photographs about the Civil War and about the Vietnam War. And the discussions are led by student veterans on campus. So we have Joe Huff, who is in the EDS program, and he drives up from the Asheville area to be a part of this program. So we're really, really lucky that he's willing to put in that work. We have Phil Weiner, who is involved with the Student Veterans Association on campus. We have Mel Falk, who is in the Education Leadership Program and does work with expressive arts therapy. And then we have Adam Williams. He is the son of an Army Ranger. So they lead the discussions, and we kind of sit back and watch them go. And so we talk about the books, and we also just kind of end up talking about people's experiences.
Are they drawing comparisons between the experiences related in the Civil War stories versus the Vietnam era stories?
Yeah, very much so. And also today, the theme of the discussion series is blurred boundaries. And so we're looking at the Civil War in Appalachia was a specifically interesting case because not everybody was on one side. So there were sometimes families who were on opposing sides. And so the books that we're reading explore the tensions of that. And then in the Vietnam War as well, when people were fighting, it was sometimes difficult to distinguish, what side the people they were on. So,
are you looking specifically at the High Country's divisions in the Civil War?
Yeah,
because it was quite pronounced up here.
And I've also read that there were a number of people who didn't take one side or the other.
Yeah,
they just opted out.
Yeah. So we're reading Cold Mountain, which addresses that. John Ely's Time of Drums, and we watched the film The World Made Straight, which is about the Shelton Laurel Massacre that occurred just outside of the Asheville area.
I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a sad story where a number of people who were Union sympathizers were killed, and they ranged from a young boy who I believe was 12 years old to older gentlemen. And so the film kind of explores how that's impacted the region even now. So.
And that was my question. How long would these effects, these social effects among family members, and how long would that last? And apparently generations.
This film kind of explores that, and I think the impact on the region when people had to leave to go and fight in the war, they left their farms and homesteads unattended, so it's, it has long-lasting impact.
Well, my family, the Spiceland family, was from the land between the lakes, And I asked a researcher there, or somebody who was part of it's a national park or whatever, and I said, what political party were they? And that was a big deal, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson. And he said they were of the Again It party. And I said, what do you mean by it? I knew what he meant, but I wanted him to explain to me. And he said they were against, and my grandfather was like that. It didn't matter who was president, he didn't like him. And I think that was, in my opinion, was affected by the Civil War and by those attitudes.
Yeah, yeah.
Apparently, here in the high country, when the recruiting groups came through for the Confederate Army, people here would just sort of melt back into the mountains for a few weeks
Yeah.
until they left and come back out again and resume their normal activities. They weren't, like you were saying, Valerie, they just weren't for anything. They didn't want to take part.
Have you studied, I don't have the names here, but I've seen them, Mysteries at the Museum. There was something
Oh, I
about
love
them.
those.
And there was, and sometimes they're not very accurate.
Yeah, this is true.
But there was a woman who dressed up as a man and went with her husband to war, and then they left the war. They kind of resigned the war, and they're buried in Avery County.
Oh,
not
I
too
didn't
far
know
from-
that.
Yes, they
Oh,
are.
wow.
I could take you to
Wow.
the cemetery.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, as part of the spring discussion series, we're doing a chapter focusing on women's war involvement, and so that would be an interesting thing to check
That
out.
is really interesting, yeah.
Valerie, when you were relating the series of discussions that you're going to have, I wasn't counting, but I should have done that. How many are there? How many of these sessions are there from now until the end of the program?
Yeah, so there are 6 each semester.
I see.
So the first one is kind of an opener, and we explore the film Gettysburg a little bit, and then read the 2 novels about the Civil War, and then we have 2 novels about the Vietnam War, and then from there, the final day is sharing our own stories. So people will come together and we'll have writing workshops and art making, so people can just share their own experiences.
See. Well, that's a nice segue into the next thing. What's it like working with student veterans?
Yeah.
What are some of their stories? Just sort of take that wherever you want to
All right.
go with that.
Yeah, it's been really rewarding working with our student veterans. Part of what the grant is designed to do is bring together veterans, family members of veterans, and civilians who are interested. And so each of our project directors has one of those. I'm the interested civilian. And so from the outsider perspective, what's been really interesting about the stories that we've been going through are just the diversity of experiences. I think when civilians think about veterans, there's, kind of these stereotypical images.
Well, that's-
There's the kind of the glorified
Yeah,
hero
yeah.
or the, gunslinging warrior type
The
of
ultra macho.
person.
That's what I was. That's what
Yeah.
I was going to ask. I was assuming you had the same perspective coming in because what do you know of war? You know what you see at the movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, television, what you've read, and the perspectives of the reporters who were embedded. So yeah, what's it really like?
Yeah.
The newsreels from the 40s.
Oh, yeah.
Very sanitized. My mother would tell me about going to the theater and seeing about war. And when we took the trip to Poland some years ago, and I hopped around, I don't know how I did it all, but I went to some of the places, Auschwitz and Birkenau and whatever, and I saw places, and I told my mother, I said, it was what you saw and what the reality was very different.
Yeah, yeah. And just, the different backgrounds that people come from. So someone coming from West Point is going to be different than somebody that's coming to the military to pay for their college. And then we don't always think about all these different dimensions.
Realities,
Yeah.
their lived experiences.
Yeah.
Well, if I could add one thing about the connection. We think of the Civil War as a long time ago and dead people and no connection to us. And my wife's family, her great-great-grandfather fought at Gettysburg, 147th Pennsylvania, and he died in 1932. And my wife's mother remembers sitting on his lap and him telling stories. So the connection's a lot closer than what we give credit for.
Oh, absolutely, and with
yeah.
things you wouldn't necessarily think about. I was in Gettysburg, it'll be a year ago this December, and toward the battlefield, beautiful day after snow, And it's hard to imagine what it was like, but I'm always trying to imagine. I went by the North Carolina Memorial, and Gutzon Borglum designed that memorial, which I didn't know. So a Mount Rushmore connection.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The art that's involved in the monuments on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Was a whole nother story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
two discussion sessions ago, one of our participants came in and she had letters from her, I don't know how many great-great-great-grandfather from his
Wow.
letters he sent home to his wife from the war. So there's, a really personal connection for folks still.
When I was in the 8th grade, actually, there was somebody in town who found a bundle of letters in the attic. It's one of these kind of stories. And it was from apparently this elderly woman's father or grandfather. This was the 60s when we were doing this.
1860s.
Yes, practically. It seems that way
Yeah.
sometimes. But she donated all these letters to the school.
Oh, great.
And so we just happened to be in the right class at the right time.
Wow.
So they got dropped in our little group's lap. There were about 20 of us in class. And we wrote a narrative based on those letters.
Wow.
And like we wrote
Yeah,
a diary
yeah.
based on what he was reporting in his letters home. And this was in Massachusetts. So it's
Well, I
really
do have
isn't that far
I have a
away.
procedural question. In terms of doing research, did you have to get permission, obviously some kind of permission from these people? Did you record their sessions, those kind of things?
Oh, we don't record the sessions.
Okay.
So it's more of a grant to facilitate the discussions. So it's almost like a miniature class that we have with students as well as veterans in the community. So it's more about outreach than research exactly. So
Good.
we've got IRB approval and all that kind of stuff. So we'll write about it, but the recording, we decided not to do that because we just want people to feel free to express whatever their reactions are to the books and the images that we look at, and so we thought that might be a hindrance for folks. So.
And there are plenty of dimensions to explore in both the Civil War and, of course, in Vietnam. I always think about the different types of units and different types of military units that could be part of the story. In Vietnam, you have the helicopter pilots. First time we've ever really had helicopter gunships. The Brown Water Navy, which is completely different than anything else we'd ever had before, and then the Civil War, of course, it'd be the artillery units, the infantry, the cavalry, which has changed over the years, of course. But there's plenty to mine there. That must be really a fascinating thing to do.
Yeah, and our discussion leaders, we have a member of the Navy, a veteran of the Navy, a veteran of the Army, and one of our leaders is also a current National Guardsman. And he had a really interesting story that he told. He also does repatriation of remains and personal effects. And he came upon, he was called upon to do this and brought some remains to a World War II soldier's son. And they had gone off to war, and Joe tells the story much better than I possibly can, but had gone off to war when the son was maybe 6 months old, and so he never met his father, and when he first got remains, he went over to the village in France where he had died, and it turned out the whole village has a memorial to his father because as his plane was crashing, he made the effort to fly away from the village so he wouldn't destroy the town or kill the people in it. So, and he had never known about it until that happened. So
Wow.
the sharing of stories is really, really important.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
There's a thing that stuck with me. Andy Rudy, who was never short for words.
True that.
In fact, he was a writer for Arthur Godfrey for his TV show. People don't realize that. But I guess it was the 40th anniversary. CBS News went back to D-Day. And he's walking through the hedgerows, and he talked about people say that they gave their lives. He said they didn't give their lives, they were taken. and they went to a commercial. And that's always stuck with me, that we have these phrases, we have these cute little things that we talk about war. And indeed, they were taken. They didn't necessarily voluntarily give their lives.
Yeah.
And I think that's to go back to Valerie's story about the crashing pilot. I mean, this is why I think the French are so eternally grateful. You know, I hear a lot about the French don't like the ugly Americans and all that. It's just not true. I mean, they really are grateful that we did, you know, solve the problem that they had. I mean, it really was due to American might, largely.
And isn't there a difference between northern France and southern France in terms of the relationship that they might have with Americans?
Well,
I've
sure.
heard that.
Well, and that goes back to during the war. I mean, the Vichy regime
Yeah.
was in southwest of France, and so that's where, you know, the sympathizers, the collaborationists, were headquartered, and they were able to hop over to Morocco when they needed to get out of the way, things like that. And yeah, that's exactly right. Well, we've got Veterans Day coming up, so let's talk about that a little bit. We had discussed this a little bit before, I think, last week, just in preparation for today. What's the difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day? What is the difference? Is it important? And what exactly do each of those mean?
You want to go?
Well,
Because this is a personal
I brought
hot
it up.
topic.
You know,
Yeah.
I've seen on Facebook, you know, today is Veterans Day, and we memorialize all those who died in service to their country. That's Memorial Day. That's not Veterans Day. You know, we honor people who laid down their lives for, and I mean not literally, but, you know, put their lives out of the way for maybe a year or 2 or 3. I just heard somebody died in Afghanistan on his 3rd tour of duty after going back for just a couple of weeks. But again, we are thinking about the people who are still alive, and some of them are very old. Some are in their 90s, you know. And you mentioned that when you were in France, that it was the last World War I veteran from France that died at that time.
He was about 109, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they made a very, very big deal in the
bet
press
they
about
did.
that. About that. But, you know, to make a further distinction, I mean, Memorial Day came before Veterans Day, right? Memorial Day
Armistice
was
Day?
well, Memorial Day was in the wake of the Civil War.
Oh, that's right.
And,
Yeah.
you know, it was originally called Decoration Day. And whereas Veterans Day originally called, and I can remember this as a kid, we didn't call it Veterans Day, we called it Armistice Day.
Yeah.
And what the armistice was they were referring to was World War I.
Yeah.
That's why it's, you know, November 11th.
And I love the pictures. I saw one a couple of days ago of this old, grizzly, long beard gentleman, obviously a Civil War veteran, talking to these young kids, apparently in the 20s or 30s. The last Civil War veteran died in, what, 1959, from what I understand?
right, yeah.
And we're still paying for veterans' benefits. I have a great-great-grandfather who apparently, and don't ask me how or why or whatever, but he had a child when he was very old, and I think she's still living, who's getting money from his Civil War pension.
Wow.
Yeah.
Imagine. Yeah, and that last veteran was a Confederate veteran.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't remember the details about that. So, is it important to distinguish between these two holidays? I mean, there is, I think we've established pretty clearly a definite difference. But does that, I know,
yeah,
Dave, you've kind of talked about that, and Heather?
I think it is. You know, veterans, they're here with us now. Let's celebrate their accomplishments, what they've done for us, and the things that we say we believe in. The folks who truly did sacrifice the ultimate thing you can for your country, right? Or who have gone on. That's Memorial Day. You pause, you reflect, you can have a connection with veterans. When you have Memorial Day and the memory of people, that's what you're connecting with more than the actual person. You know? So to me, that's the difference, and I think it is important to make that distinction.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because we have so many people that are living, breathing right now that have done a lot for this country, and
Yeah.
they need to know that we care.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I'd be curious from your research, what kind of things can we do as a society to bring them back into whatever the mainstream happens to be? You know, we hear all these stories about PTSD and all the problems, but what kind of things do they face?
Well, I think one thing that I feel like I can speak to that's in the realm of what this grant is about is a lot of people veterans that I speak to, especially those on campus, feel a disconnect between their experiences serving in the military and this campus location. And often that's heightened by the fact that they don't often feel that there's space to kind of share their stories and experiences. So I would, say a good way to support is to talk to a veteran and not just thank them for their service, but really try to understand what their experiences were like, get their opinions and thoughts, and also recognize that they're diverse people, and so you can't lump all into one particular group, and so that's why it's especially important to hear each individual stories.
And I would
Well,
love to.
I think that's going to be our time, and that's a
Oh,
a
no.
great
goodness.
You're
thing.
supposed to give us 3 minutes.
I hope that we were so involved. But I hope that's something that people take to heart. Our viewers, watching today, understand that what they can do to actually ease the transition for those who serve.
All right.
Heather.
Well, to close the show this week, Dr. Paul Gates will give us a fun fact about the history of Veterans Day.
Well, Great Britain, France, Australia, and Canada also commemorate the veterans of World War I and World War II on or near November 11th. Canada has Remembrance Day, while Britain has Remembrance Sunday, which occurs the second Sunday of November.
Well, that's our time for today. I'm Professor Heather Page Preston. We hope you'll join us next time on The Academics.